Welcome once again to our Zero Trust webinar, Transforming Cybersecurity. Now over to your moderator, Dr. Paul Shaw.
Well, thank you. And thank you for coming back. This is the fifth in the series that we've had in Zero Trust, Transforming Cybersecurity. This one, we're going to get into some of the core engineering and architecture constructs. And for the last 5 years, I've had the privilege at DAU of working with the National Institute of Standards Technologies, MEP, Manufacturing Extension Partnerships. And they're a nonprofit group owned by NIST. And they have some of the most amazing engineers I've ever met. And today I'm going to be bringing on one of them, who I consider a national treasure. He has been helping numerous small businesses and others understand cybersecurity, work through their cybersecurity concerns. He has been a chief architect at major corporations. I know he helped develop the Zero Trust construct for JP Morgan Chase and Bank of America. He was also at DHS, Ernie Edmonds, that is, for years, and came up with a lot of the core constructs that we're still using for cybersecurity and security architecture. So I asked him to come and speak to us and help us understand some of the architectural constructs and how we can make Zero Trust more effective. And with that, Ernie, if you can come on, please. I'm going to be turning it over to you here shortly.
Hey, Paul, can you hear me okay?
I got you loud and clear, Ernie. And if you want to bring your camera up, I'll switch over and let you take it over.
I am struggling with the camera. The little light just went dim, so I'm working on it.
Okay. Do you want Christy to share your slides?
Yeah, the slide presentation would be great, and I may just give up on the camera. I've had some tech issues this morning.
Oh, sorry about that. Christy, thank you.
Well, good morning, everybody. My name's Ernie Edmonds. I've been with CMTC. CMTC is the NIST MEP for California. We are the premier center within the network. There's 51 centers, one per state, and then Puerto Rico. But as far as cyber, California does take the point on that. And I am by title senior managing consultant, but I try to help people, and that's what our entire team does. We have a team of about 7 engineers, decades of experience for each person. So we have depth if we need to ask questions and so forth. My background, I'm a lifelong hacker. I started at 9 years old and then made a career out of it. Just a little script kiddie back then. And anyway, I'm kind of a one-trick pony, but it's kind of a decent trick to have these days. Next slide, please. This is going to be about a 30-minute presentation on architecture. And what I'm going to try to do is, I know we've got a mixed bag of folks in here, and we've got, executive level, and then we've got admins and engineers and so forth. So I'll try to walk that tightrope. And, if there are questions, please put those in the Q&A. And then we do have some pre-submitted questions that will take the remainder of the time after we finish the model. We'll answer those to the best that we can. And I think Paul and I will just kind of have a conversational type answering of those. So 15 and 15 Q&A remaining time. It says heavy technical. It's not that heavy, so don't think it's going to lose you. Most of the time, we keep people interested in the slides the entire time. So hopefully that'll be the case today as well. Next slide, please. So what we do a lot is we help small companies to reach adherence compliance, whichever word you want to use, with the DFAR 7012, aka the 171, aka the CMMC 2.0 level 2. A couple of the requirements, or a few of the requirements that we really hit the nail on the head with this security architecture is 347, restrict, disable, or prevent the use of non-essential programs and functions. Of course, that's usually whitelisting, blacklisting. Ports and protocols is right in the catalyst of this framework. So we want to have most restrictive, least permissive methodologies for everything. So at the network level, when you're talking about architecture, you've got the foundational enterprise architecture that tells you, what products you can use and what protocols and methods you can use and, things like that. Then as you build on top of that, there's systems architecture. And then on top of that, of course, application architecture. And then finally, the security architecture permeates everything and brings it all together from a security construct perspective. So, ports and protocols from a network perspective, that will take care of inter-zone communications, restrictions, and allowance. If someone is trying to go a step further than host-based firewalls, the Windows integrated filter, or the Linux firewall, or whatever you're using. And I'm pretty well versed in both Linux and Microsoft Tech. I do have a number of certifications in each of those. So if there are questions of a technical nature, feel free to go as deeply as you would like to go. I can usually handle those. And if I can't, then I won't. Anyway, ports and protocols, that's right where this network architecture lives. Next is the 3.13.2 employee architectural design, software development techniques, and sysengineering principles that promote effective information security within organizational systems. So this is an architectural design, network architectural design. It's based on segmentation. I'll get more into that in just a little bit as far as what the reason for the segmentation is. And that's often what I see when I see people talk about segmentation. I see their model and all right, it's segmented, but what was what were you trying to accomplish? Was it just to break something apart? Or was there some security thing in mind? And with the architecture we're going to cover today, we call it the CMTC Security Reference Architecture. It's one that I wrote for Homeland. I wrote, I think, all the original models for Homeland. I'd just gotten there. It had just been stood up. This was post 9/11. And literally my first week on the job, my boss says, we need models. We don't have any models. Everybody's got their own model, but we don't have anything standardized. So please write everything. So there were 17 models. And this one lends itself really well to small to medium enterprise, and it does scale. When I've Paul mentioned JP Morgan Chase and Bank of America and some of those companies. The model has been used in those locations. I don't know if it still is because I've been gone from those areas for a while. But I was chief security officer at Petco, and so if you've got dogs and cats and critters and whatever, you're probably familiar with them. This model is used there. I don't work there anymore, so maybe they've switched away from it, but I doubt it. And there's been other things too. I was deputy chief information security officer at the U.S. Capitol, so that actually predates Homeland Security. So there was a loose interpretation of this model before I really solidified it there. So it does scale really well. I would say that if you've got an organization and you're less than maybe 5,000 people, this model, as we're going to cover it today, will probably work well. If you're less than that, say you're 20 people, 30, 50, 500 people, then it's going to work really, really well. There are models that are out there that have different purposes, whether it would be the Purdue model or some of the other ones. I know Google's got one and Forrester's got one for zero trust and things like that. I'm not saying you should use my model, but I think you should consider using my model and then adapt it as you need to. It is not a fixed model. It is dynamic, but the principles will help you to achieve zero trust. I assume everybody's going with a phased approach in zero trust. So, this is usually like a phase 2-ish kind of a thing, maybe phase 3, depending on what you're doing. But, we're going to cover a lot of stuff today, but, this is an architectural model for 3.13.2. Next is 3.13.6, deny network comms traffic by default and allow network comms traffic by exception only. So as you're configuring your firewall, it's always important to explicitly allow whichever ports that you need to operate your business, and nothing else. Have nothing gratuitous whatsoever. And at the bottom of that rule stack per zone, make sure that you put your deny all. So you'll have allow this, allow that, allow the other, and that can be host to host or host to range or range to host, or whatever that looks like. And then at the bottom of that, deny all. So if it doesn't fit one of the explicitly defined constructs, then it will be denied. Currently, there are 9 security reference architectures that we have at CMTC. We're going to be covering Model 6 today. So 7, 8, and 9, that brings into play operational tech. So if you've got ICS SCADA or something like that, then there's 3 models that specifically extend into that realm. We're not going to go there today just because of time. We're already at 10 minutes and we've got to finish this in the next 20 minutes or so. So we're going to be covering Model 6. What Model 6 does explicitly provide for is segmentation based on the data, the value of the data. And that's back to what I was saying earlier, why did you segment? Because sometimes I see that people will segment based on the role of the device. Okay, well, fine. So you've got all of your Exchange servers back when, people actually had Exchange servers. I'd see that they're all grouped together, and then maybe the old style MTA message transport agent would be in, a different zone than say the database or, the EDB. So that's based on role. And while there's value there, really what matters is the data, the information, and the value of that. So if you've got PHI, PII for like HR functions, personally identifiable information, protected health information, then that's something that has to be protected because, you don't want that to get out. You're going to face litigation and brand tarnish and, whatever. So same thing with like CUI, controlled unclassified information, which at Homeland we called that SBU, sensitive but unclassified, but all these names have rolled into CUI at this point. So it is controlled unclassified information. So it's nothing national security related, or at least it shouldn't be. Sometimes things get misidentified, and we work with those as we see it. So next slide, please. The process, when you're looking at an architecture, I'm just going to cover this very lightly because we really need to get into the meat of this, but choose a competent firewall and network components. A lot of my clients that I have at CMTC will use open source things like OpenSense, pfSense, because they're very good firewalls. They're not Palo Alto as far as bandwidth and capacity from that perspective, but from a features perspective, they're very robust. And I am a proponent of free and open source software. That's just, one of the things that has really helped me to be able to look at the actual open source code base when I'm evaluating a product. And then I can see that there's nothing in there that's going to hurt me. Determine what puzzles pieces you have. Back when I was a kid, we had a Rector set. And for anybody that's, 40 years plus, you're probably familiar with that. So we would dump our stuff out on the floor and then we would build whatever we had. Same principle here. Dump it out, see what you've got, see what computers you've got, what network things you've got, whether it be switches, routers, firewalls, or wireless APs, whatever. Determine what the perfect state looks like for you. Make sure that you're thinking, downstream, but understand that right now is kind of the target. But, if you know that something's going to change in a year, 3 years, or, maybe 5 years, if you can plan that far out, most people can at this point. It's just too dynamic, but do the best you can and then figure out what you need. When you stand up this firewall, number 5, delete all the existing rules, sans the anti-lockout rule. You don't want to lock yourself out of your firewall. But everything else, any type of these gratuitous rules, they're usually not based on most restrictive, least permissive methodologies. So you want to get rid of those. And then what you'll do is granularly define the rules that are needed based on the explicit data flow that's needed to, again, conduct business. Build to perfection. Nothing is too granular. When you start talking about like external sources like DNS, so things like this are called general support systems because other systems will access those to support other functions. So internal GSS would be like internal DNS, internal NTP, network time protocol, DNS, DNS, domain name resolution. those are internal, and then you can have external counterparts for that. I do like risk remediated DNS, so something like OpenDNS by Cisco or Quad9 or some of the others that are out there. Cloudflare has a good offering as well. Pick whichever one seems to fit for what your needs are. I didn't say this in the beginning, but at CMTC, we don't recommend products and services. So when you hear me say something like, product today, whatever it would be, it's not a recommendation. It's simply something that I know will do whatever the job it is that we're talking about at that moment. So don't read anything into that, please. But when you're talking about these external services, you can restrict down to the IP and the port. So if you need to have your internal DNS, or say your firewall DNS, hit your external GSS, general support system, then it's okay to put in the FQDNs, fully qualified domain names, or the IP addresses, and then the port numbers. And that's a really good thing to do, because now DNS can only go to the DNS servers that you want. So if you're using something that has filtering, like, anti-malware filtering or something, there's no way for one of your people inside the network to, go to Google DNS, and, now the world's the limit. So again, granularly define these as best you can. There's always version 2.0. If you get it wrong, stuff will work a lot of times, but then you look at it, oh, I could have tightened that up a little more. Well, version it, go to 2.0 or 1.1 or whatever makes sense for you. Next slide, please. So there's two rules. Level hopping is prohibited. So, and we're going to get into what that means in just a minute. And then number two, refer to rule one. There's only one rule with this, and there's actually an exception to that rule as well. External GSS, we talked about that. These are aliases. So let me go back up a little bit. Firewall constructs that are important to understand. Aliasing. Aliases are just that. They're something that you as a human can understand, and you can say like external GSS, and then you put in the IP addresses. I'm going to use OpenDNS by Cisco, 208.67.222.222 and 220.220. So if I put those into an alias, now when I'm looking at my my rule stack for my firewall zones, it looks like human English. And for a small business, it's not that bad. But when you get into some global corporation or some government agency or something, if you're looking at firewall rules all day, that's taxing. So this will help your brain kind of deal with the whole day of doing stuff like that. Same thing with network aliases. You can do ports, and which is good. So you can put 80 and 443 together for like web traffic. And now you've got a particular device or group of devices, like your workstation. Say you create an alias for workstations. Workstations can go to, say, allowed external, and I'll get to that in just a minute, over web traffic. So now, it just looks really human intelligible when you're looking at the rule stack, and, you just go through all the zones when you're doing analysis and, optimization, stuff like that. Allowed external, I just mentioned that. There are some firewalls that allows you to do a geo-block alias, and not all firewalls allow for this. There are some commercially available firewalls that don't have this option, and I wish they did, and some of them are quite expensive. But back to the open source, both pfSense and OpenSense will both allow you to do this. It's not that hard to set up either. There's a couple extra steps to do because sometimes these IP ranges will change, and you've got to have something dynamic to keep track of that, because there's a bazillion of them in the world. But what I do is, when I'm standing this up, I'll create this alias, I'll enable everything, and then I'll backtrack. So WS, Western Samoa, that they sold their namespace to the highest bidder like 20 years ago, and now there's like serials.ws, which is if you want a Windows activation key or something like that, then you can go there, but you're probably going to get more than you bargained for. You're probably going to come away with an STI or something. So block that. Iran, Iraq, Yemen, Somalia, Syria, North Korea, Vietnam, Cuba, Venezuela, China, Russia, There's, with the war that's going on in Ukraine, I don't open up Ukraine anymore. And Belarus, people like that, or countries like that, I usually restrict. And you'll figure out what works for you. The reason I say to do this as a permit all then subtract is because of like Cloudflare and Akamai and these distributed content providers. If you block everything but the US and Canada, or whatever that would look like in a perfect world for you, then when you hit, like if you're on the East Coast, I used to live in Virginia in Fairfax County and Loudoun County, I would often hit Akamai servers that were in the UK. And if I don't have the UK open, then my pages don't load right. So just be aware that if something's not loading right, check your geo block. Next slide, please. Host aliases, protocol aliases. Not going to go into that any further. Next slide, please. Next slide. There we go. So we used to call this a trust zone topology, but with zero trust naming, zero trust's been out for a while. The first time I dealt with it was at the U.S. Capitol. And we needed something that did not have the benefit of a physical barrier, because the House and the Senate and the people that are there, the constituency needs to get to it. So there's a lot of unguarded ports out there. So we implemented .1x and some other stuff too. But anyway, now we're calling it protection layer topology instead of trust zone topology. It's protection layer. So each of these layers, you got to have a stoplight. So there's red, yellow, green. The white zone that you see over to the left, and these are just sample IP subnet ranges, and it might work for you if you need to extend it. If you need more than 250 hosts, change it to a 23-bit mask or whatever. And I usually have the VLAN assignment matched the subnet, just so if I plug in or if I'm configuring it, just makes it easier. Notice you've got 3 red zones. So red is untrusted. Yellow is semi-trusted, and again, we're trying to get away from that. So it would be less trusted, or what would we call it? More restricted, less restricted, whatever you want to call it. But it's essentially semi-trusted, then green is trusted, and then the blue over at the right is the authentication. And that's for cloud-based MFA. We have a lot of clients that it just makes more sense to go to a cloud-based multi-factor authentication solution, whether it would be Okta or OneLogin or Duo or something else, Microsoft Azure MFA, whatever. That's where that authentication schema would go to. Down at the bottom, you see some IP ranges and schemas that, that's how I usually set things up. I advise my clients to set it up. If they want help, it just helps me to help them. And you can, do whatever you want to with stuff like that. Next slide, please. Now it's a little clearer. This is where we start putting things in. IoT devices, things like that, go in red. They're untrusted. They barely work. They're usually really weak devices, and they want to get them to do whatever they want them to do. So if it's an Apple TV or a Roku or something, it's not trusted at all. Certainly don't allow it to see anything as far as your traffic. That's organizational. So that tells you right there that you should be encrypting going through red, or just bypass red altogether. The reason I say encrypting with red is I like to put a web proxy in my red so that my yellow zone can get to the internet through that proxy. I mentioned there is one exception to the rule. So what this means is your black zone is the internet up at the top. So you see internet, external DNS, allowed external, yada, yada. So red can talk to black, red can talk to yellow. Again, it's explicitly defined data flow. So it's not like everything in red can talk to everything in yellow. It's what in red needs to talk to something in yellow. So maybe you've got a conference room or something like that. and you've got a guest that needs to print something. Well, you might have a printer that would not print CUI or anything sensitive that could live in yellow, and that way they could access it, print whatever they need, and then go from there. Yellow can talk to red, yellow can talk to green, yellow can talk to blue, yellow can talk to white. All the zones can talk to white. White's your management land. So the one over at the left is management. Next slide, please. So when we're talking again about yellow is where things like workstations and things go. It's things that access sensitive information, but it's not persistently stored there. So yellow can, it can get to the internet, ideally if a web proxy, but if not, that is the exception to the rule. Yellow can get to the black zone, the internet zone, if it needs to directly. However, you do lose some protection there. But notice green is a double hop away. Green can never get to the internet. So the beauty of this model is that when somebody comes in, they might get into red. In fact, there is a likelihood that a nation state actor would get into red. There is a potential that it could get into red and then hop into yellow. If that's the case, then all right, they've gotten into yellow and they might be able to, and the reason I say that yellow is potentially a point of compromise too is, your workstations are in yellow and they're going to the internet. So if they bring back browser-based ransomware, or they pull down something and you haven't enabled whitelisting of apps to where only explicitly defined apps can execute, then it's potential that ransomware could spring up and bang, you're on fire. That's the whole thing with flat network topology, which most people in the world use flat networks. It's kind of like the row houses in DC or Baltimore or Philly or whatever. One of them catches fire. Well, it does have a firewall, but yeah, how well does that work all the time? Essentially, the whole block burns down. That's what you don't want to have happen. So anyway, with this model, with green being never accessible from the internet, then if somebody did get in, they would have to get something out of the green zone, they would have to compromise multiple types of security. So one, there is no firewall rule right now that allows data flow from green to black. So they would need to get into the firewall config, which is only accessible from the white zone. So these red, yellow, green, they do not have management capability for the firewall or the switches or whatever. So they would have to break into white and then go back in and configure the firewall. So that would be one compromise that would be necessary to exfiltrate. Secondly, they would need to, in most cases, compromise your AD or a local workstation that would live in yellow. So that's 2 breaches of security just to have the potential to exfiltrate anything that lives in the green zone. So again, back to the beginning, the value of the data is what's important. So valuable, persistently stored data is stored in green. The things that access that data is in yellow. So the workstations and what have you, mobile devices, if they're going to attach to wireless. Guest wireless would normally go in red, and then internal organizational wireless would go into yellow. And I see people asking about questions. You can put them in the Q&A and I'll answer them when we get to that point. Yeah, there's there's time for that in just a little bit. Next slide, please. Now we're looking at I was talking about organizational wireless. It's a good idea to use something like radius auth for your internal organizational wireless that would be in yellow. I don't like to just use a pre-shared key for stuff like that. It's it's a single point of failure. Whereas if you've got strong authentication for even your wireless, then you're going to be stronger for it. You're going to be able to withstand an attack better than you would otherwise. Next slide. So we're changing the look of the model a little bit. This is going to tell you where things should normally live. And I know we're getting ready to go over. This is going to take probably an extra 10 minutes that's going to eat into our Q&A, but I need to explain this model to you if you're to understand it. So over in the white zone, IDS, IPS, your Windows admin workstation, I said Windows admin, you may have Linux or whatever, but your admin workstation goes over there. Your SIM, if you've got something like a Forescout or Tanium or FireEye, something that, quick clamp and decent logic as far as management. That's where all that stuff goes. And again, that's where you'll do firewall and network management, and then, stuff like that. IoT and whatever that you don't mind if it just burns to the ground goes in red. Your clients, again, workstations, whatever, that usually goes in yellow. I've got these listed as AD1 and AD2. Most people will do it as DC1, DC2. So DC1 is usually where you'll put that agent for your MFA, and that's why you've got the blue zone over there. That's normally one server that'll go over there. It could be more, but usually it's just one. And then AD2 is where your, some people will have that as their file and print server, so FPS. It's an integrated role with AD2 or DC2. And so whatever that would look like for you, they just go in green. Anything that's high value data, anything business logic, whether it be an on-prem ERP or something like that, print servers, that's important. So I don't give people direct access to my printers. The printers are, so in Microsoft terminology, a printer is a software representation within Active Directory, within the Windows construct that is it's a software configurable thing that looks and points to a physical print device. So a print device, that's what we call printer. It, it spits out the paper with content on it. That's a print device in Windows speak, in Microsoft speak. So the printer is software defined. One thing that I do like to do is I'll have a CUI printer or a sensitive information printer, or, organizationally sensitive, whatever you want to call it. And I configure the header to where anything that comes off of that printer already gets the CUI marking. And that just helps me. I don't have to go buy some stamp, and, people don't have to, remember to stamp it and stuff like that. It just spits it out and it's already marked. So that's good. And because any of these printers and print devices potentially can do CUI, then they go in green. I don't allow them to be in yellow. But back to that thing 10 minutes ago, if you've got somebody in the conference room, it's in red and they need to print, they can't print to a green printer. So you may, if you've got that use case, you may want to stick a printer in yellow to where, that can be done. Just understand that it's never to be used for printing anything sensitive, CUI or intellectual property, whatever. Next slide, please. So now we've got these things defined. The roles are in there, the servers are deployed, the workstations are deployed, whatever. Now we've got to figure out the firewalls of the firewall rules. Remember, nothing is gratuitous. So I need to, over at the left, or excuse me, the right, notice I've got NTP, DNS, W3 for web traffic, print traffic, file transfer, AD traffic, IDSM, yada, yada, SSH. So I'm going to very quickly run through these rules. What's going to happen is anytime you see an arrow, that's an explicitly defined rule at the network level. Again, if you're implementing host-based firewall rules at the same time, that will also handle intra-zone comms. So like right now, anything in yellow can talk to anything in yellow because we haven't configured a host-based firewall. Anything in green can talk to green, but green can't talk to blue. Green, nothing can talk outside the zone because there is not a rule for that communications traffic to flow. So by default, it's denied because remember, you deleted all your rules. Next slide, please. So the first one we're going to hit is purple. So what I do is I'll look at the firewall first. So the firewall needs to get to external NTP to set its own clock, and then it needs to do the same thing with DNS, and then it needs to get to allowed external so that it can get its update. So if I'm using like pfSense, I said OpenSense earlier, but let's use pfSense now. It's going to need to get to updates or softwareupdates.pfsense.org, I think is the FQDN for it. So I would need to allow for that. So I'm going to need to allow the firewall to get out on web traffic 443. So 80. If it tries to go out, it's going to redirect. But I need time sync. So I need to be able to set its clock. I need to be able to resolve names, and I need to be able to get to my updates from the firewall. So I configure those three rules. The next thing I do is I have AD, both of those DC1 and DC2, I have it point to the firewall. So I daisy chain these. And then the stuff that's internal, like the workstations and what have you that are in the yellow, green, and white zones, they will normally point to Active Directory. Same thing with like DHCP operations. I usually allow my domain controllers to handle DHCP in the yellow zone. I never have DHCP in green or white. Those are always statically assigned. The same thing with blue. You're going to have a server. It's a server, so you're going to statically assign it. Just a good idea never to DHCP a server, because even with reservations, there's some ambiguity there that doesn't need to exist. So yellow, again, DHCP would come from probably a split scope from 81 and 82 together that would provide those services. So you need to have a DHCP helper. Windows calls that a DHCP relay agent that you'd have to configure in yellow and provide for that rule also, that would go to the green and blue zones to the IPs. Next slide, please. Same thing with DNS. Next slide, please. Web traffic. Notice that red is web traffic. I do that on purpose because that's probably your most destructive path. If you're to get ransomware, it's probably going to come in over port 80 or 443. So again, all these arrows just mean that you have a rule that's been created for that traffic. Next slide, please. So burgundy is print traffic. Remember, workstations and stuff need to go to the print servers. Print servers need to go to the print devices. But remember, that's an intrazone comm. The print server to the print device, that's intrazone. So now you've got you don't need a network-based rule for that. SIM and stuff like that, they're over in white. You might need to have your SIM printouts a rule stack or some sort of a configuration, so possibly they need print traffic as well. This is not a prescriptive thing. Look at your own network and determine what data flow you need between which roles to which other roles, and provide the most restrictive rule that gets the job done. That's the moral of this story. Next slide, please. File transfer, Windows AD. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Windows AD I've got in regular green because that's pretty integrated traffic flow. One thing with AD, remember there's dynamic allocation of high ports for like services that are within Active Directory. It is a real struggle to get least permissive rule sets for domain controllers. If you need to open up TCP UDP 1 to 65535 or any, then often my clients will start with that, and then as they have time, they'll restrict that a little better as they can. You're not going to get a non-ambiguous rule set for Windows Active Directory. It's just not possible right now, in my opinion. Next slide, please. IDS and SIM, everything points back, but remember it has a reciprocal rule. So notice there's two arrows. There's not a single arrow with two ends to it. In most firewalls, and all the firewalls I can think of, there's no such thing as a reciprocal or a two-way rule. So you have to have a reciprocal rule. So one arrow goes one way, another arrow goes the other way. That's two different rules, and they'll be in different zones. You have a white zone rule and then a blue zone rule. And you just have to make sure to do that reciprocal rule in most cases for things like IDS, because the IDS and the SIM, they need to get in to be able to monitor that traffic, and then to do queries. A lot of times your IDS or your SIM will also do your vulnerability assessment scanning. A lot of them will have that module, so you don't have to go buy another product. And you're going to have that rule open for that. In that case, it's going to need to be able to scan the entire port stack on whatever the host is, and all the hosts, so it can do discovery if there's some rogue thing that's gotten in there. Go ahead and go to the next couple of slides. We're just going to go through these really quickly. We're almost finished with this. Next. And VPN traffic. So you can have more than one red zone, and you can have more than one yellow zone. This goes into the micro segmentation, which is in the tenets of Zero Trust. What I do is these IoT devices, they are not in the same subnet broadcast domain as my VPN server. I don't want them looking at where the IP addresses are, the external as it's coming in and sniffing my traffic. You don't know what these things are doing. So have, multiple red zones. So, the first one could be your subnet of 10. Next one would be 11, next one 12, 13. You can have as many as you want. In that case, you can have 10, but based on what you might need, if you need more than 10, then bump the yellow zone from 20, bump it to something else. I use 10, 20, 30 because, if I plug in, like when I'm standing up this network, I do have DHCP running on all of them. Don't do that once it goes into production, but I can plug into a switch port and see which VLAN it's assigned to because I'll get DHCP. And if I see that it's on 30, all right, I know it's on, it's my green zone. Maybe I'm looking for the red zone or yellow zone. So now I can go into my switch and change that configuration as I need to. Next slide, please. At the end, you get a mess, kind of a spaghetti thing, but you're more in adherence and compliance with zero trust than you were before. So that's what you're looking for. Next slide. So now we're going into the Q&A, and sorry for going 10 minutes over, but I wanted to explain it, the best I could in the time that we have. So Paul, let me turn back over to you, and hopefully we've got some questions.
Well, Ernie, we definitely have some questions, and I've heard your presentation at least 30 times, and I learn something every time I see it, every time I hear it. I can easily understand why you were one of the chief security architects, not only for the Capitol, but for major organizations like JP Morgan Chase and Bank of America. And what you keep always showing is that you understand the devices on your network, where they should be, how they should interact, what the rules would be. So to take some of the questions that have come up during this, one of the first ones I want to handle is one from Richard Hallinger. It said, given the concept of zero trust architecture and its pillars, would the prescription of network zones interfere with the true concept of zero trust architecture?
So that's why I'm trying to go away from the term trust zones. So let's call them protection layers. This is completely compatible with all aspects of zero trust. So what you want to do is, of course, granularly microsegment and then verify the devices. So you want to always challenge the device for what it is. And there's a bunch of different ways you can do that. At the root, look for its certificate or look for its domain membership within like Active Directory, whatever that would be, the FQDN or the certificate that's generated when it joins. There's ways to do that. And that's a really good question, but you still have to do the query and the authentication. It's always verify then trust when you're in zero trust. So even if it's in the same protection layer, say it's green to green, you still want to verify either the certificate or whatever it would be and use multiple factors for that verification before you send data to it. The fact that you're even talking to it reveals certain things, but and that's where you get into like the host-based firewalls and protecting to that degree. But it just because it's in the green zone doesn't mean you trust it. It just means that based on its design, it got put into green because of the value of the data that it holds.
Yeah, and you're coming back to one of the core principles that Kindervag set out in his 5 is that we need to map and understand the workflows. Your model allows us to get very granular rules, very powerful rules, and quite frankly, your model is the best I've ever seen for further developing your segmentation strategy at the macro segmentation and micro segmentation layer, which kind of leads into the next question. And I think it's along the same lines. This was one of the ones that was submitted beforehand, is zero trust in the different types of network, technology networks, IoT, OT, IT, because we do have different needs. And I know that we brought up questions about like the Purdue reference architecture, which was from 1990, which tends to be used in the industrial control system world. But what you do is you do slight variances of this for different domains. Is that correct, Ernie?
It is, and like I mentioned earlier, the ICS SCADA, when that goes in, which Purdue is optimized for that, but Purdue is from the 90s. Things have changed a little bit since then. So Purdue is not my model. My model's my model. But based on what it is, you can microsegment to have like transduction. So transduction in ICS is what takes the electrical signal and converts it into a physical thing. So it transduces the electrical into physical. So Security Reference Model 9, Security Reference Architecture Model 9 provides for separate zones for the analytics versus the control versus the transduction. And that's why you've got, 3 extra zones with that. Those can be either channeled via VLAN or VLAN trunking or discrete configurations, discrete port configurations, whatever that would be. But yeah, it does have the ability to adapt to whatever it is. We covered Model 6 today, which provides for cloud-based MFA. But if you don't need cloud-based MFA, don't have the blue zone. Again, this is something that's adaptable, but there's baseline models based on the use cases that we see most frequently. But if it's something new, hit me up if you want to talk to me directly, info@cmtc.com. And maybe I'll make a new model, and you'll get some credit for that for bringing it up. But that's what we're trying to do, is have base use case models, and then if they are adaptable based on what the person needs to achieve most restrictive, least permissive methodology.
Well, Ernie, I got to give you a plug because folks, when I did my doctoral dissertation, I interviewed a whole series of people. Ernie was one of them. My normal interview was about 15 pages when I got done with the interview. When I got done with Ernie's, it was 115 pages. But so quite a few of the technical concepts in my doctoral dissertation were attributed to you, Ernie. And you gave more technical advice on security engineering and architectural engineering than anybody else put together.
Well, I appreciate that. Now, if I could just get this camera to work, it'd be even better.
Yeah. Hey, we don't trust you, Ernie.
Yeah.
So we covered the fact that this can be applied to different constructs, SCADA, operational technology, ICS, IT. And some of the questions keep coming back to the fact that what you've done is really a great way to develop our segmentation strategy. Now, you were able to scale this for major corporations like Bank of America and JP Morgan Chase. So when we do a model like this and we adapt it, it can basically go to almost any size organization. Is that correct?
Correct. It's based on the value of the data. And I'm not going to say that, Bank of America is using this because, you don't want to give away something that one of your previous clients is doing, because now you're potentially giving away an attack vector to someone. Not that you all would do it, but this thing's going to get published, and you don't want to do that. So what often people will do is, if they've got, say, multi-site, site-to-site VPNs or whatever, an easy way, I'm going to say easy, a easier way to do this than could be is, if you're using an IPsec VPN, then you're going to have the phase 1, which is site to site, and then you can do multiple phase 2s on each of these zones to where it extends the zone. Of course, you're going to have route tables and not, have broadcast traffic going across your WAN. But that's a easy way to scale this, is by porting the zones through the phase 2 negotiation.
Outstanding. And again, what you keep developing, or what you keep suggesting, is really what should be in the segmentation strategy, the macro and micro segmentation that people develop in their zero trust implementation plans. I'm going to take a question I just see from Sheen Foster. He says, are there any good examples of ZTA documented in SSML or MBSE efforts in multi-phase systems engineering that you would recommend? To start, I'm not aware of that yet. I think that those will develop, but Ernie, are you aware of any good examples of documented ZTA and SML or anything like that?
I'm not. There's the norms that we see all the time, but there's nothing really concrete. Zero Trust has been out for a long time, since the 90s, but it's just now picking up steam and getting some traction. So hopefully that'll come, but I don't know of anything I'd really recommend at this point.
Yeah, I mean, this is still very much an evolving area, and there's still some immaturity. There's been some great work by individual components, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, and by the way, they do have trust zones in their construct too. So it's not uncommon, or I shouldn't have said trust zones. That's what we used to call them. Understanding under, yeah, I know. I still argue with Kinderveg about it should have been no implicit trust instead of zero trust, but and he might even be listening today, so I don't know. But we need to understand the flow of information, how we monitor it, how we regulate it, how we control it, how we contain it. Your strategy that you've promoted would be extremely good for containment because it doesn't assume that I've stopped them at the perimeter, but I can easily make sure that I've got rules in place to keep them from going zone hopping in your case, right?
Correct. And, zone hopping, you've got these static rules, but if you've got some product, say you've got Tanium, Forescout, something like that can do query. One of the things that I look for is, of course, any type of traffic that is rogue or clandestine. I want to know about that, so I monitor the switch at the bit level. So if I'm coming off of the switches with like a span port, what used to be called a span port, now it's a monitor port, I look for things like that. There's several things that I look for. I look for traffic that doesn't make sense. So if I see SQL 1433 MS SQL going to a printer, then that's a red flag. But then I also look for things like I look at the stack within the hosts themselves. And one of the things I look for in like the yellow zone is the delta between the MAC and IP marriage association. So if somebody's doing like a man in the middle attack, then often they'll use what's called gratuitous ARP, and they'll change that association. So the MAC address no longer has the same IP association with it, because now they're shimming to put a man in the middle. So I look for things like that, and that helps me to detect if there's something fishy going on. Now the flip side of that is if you're using a VPN. Sometimes people use an internal VPN, like the internal VPN for like FIPS compliancy or whatever with the crypto module. So it's not always 100%, but now I'm managing by exception rather than just being blind. And that's a really good thing when you have the visibility that you can make that kind of a management call.
Outstanding. By the way, I know I see David asked the question, will a recording of this presentation be available? Absolutely. David, I'll probably have to watch it 4 more times myself just to catch all the nuances that just occurred today from Ernie. But these presentations, these slides are available, and we're a resource to you, especially DAU and CMTC. We're nonprofits, DAU's government. We're there to help you. We're there to help you to succeed. We're there to help you understand these concepts and work through them, because you can have significant cost ramifications for doing this incorrectly. And I'd kind of like to go to that a little bit. I saw in the pre-questions, people were asking, how does an acquisition person understand this? Not all of them have the technical engineering expertise of yourself. And even though I don't have 43 certifications like you do, Ernie, I consider myself a system security engineer and can usually stay with somebody like yourself. But can you just talk about the fact that if you don't understand these engineering constructs, you don't do this architecture, there can be severe cost consequences of trying to do this without doing the engineering and architecture aspect of it?
Yeah, so there's a couple things to think about from the acquisition perspective. The first one I would encourage you is to, when you come up with an idea, immediately find a sounding board, a security sounding board for your idea. If you bolt on security, if you're using SDLC, if you do not include security in the beginning, it will cost you let's flip that. You will save 70% by including security in the beginning on the total cost of security rather than re-engineering and architecting later. So find that person that you can at least use as a soundboard. Hopefully you've got somebody internally that can fill that role, but if not, just find somebody and include them through the whole SDLC.
Yeah, it can't be emphasized enough that if you start understanding this instead of just trying to put controls or add now what we're talking about with zero trust capabilities to an environment, that the cost can be exponentially different. And Ernie and I have seen people spend probably 100 times more in implementing controls on a network than they should have. And just because they spent more does not mean that it's more effective. The joke Ernie and I used to have, if you try to do this against a flat network architecture, you're going to maximize the cost and minimize the effectiveness. But
Exactly right.
yeah, so I mean, well, okay, so you and I are geeks because we think in terms of how should we engineer this, what should be designed, what should be the architecture. I know people will possibly be further interested in this, so I know on the next slide, I believe, is your email address. If you can go down one, I thought there was one with your email address if they want to contact you on this. And
Yeah,
if
it's
you
got
do
the
have
general.
questions on this, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, it's got the general. Go ahead and go to the next slide. It's got the info at CMTC. Just use that one. If we start talking, I'm going to say something zero trust related. If we start talking about, if you go through info at CMTC, and mine's E Edmonds at CMTC, I'll go and give it to you. But the first thing I'm going to do if we start talking security is I'm going to say, hey, let's switch to Signal. Signal Messenger is the only way that I will talk about security with anybody. Email is insecure, telephone is insecure, telephones, cell phones are voice over IP, and it is harvested for eternity. So, we're going to use something that's end-to-end crypto. So if you do reach out, just expect for me to switch us over to Signal.
Yeah, Ernie, you and I, our Chinese hackers friend always love us, and I'm sure I'll get a lot of hits from the CCP operatives for at least this presentation. But um, Ernie, is there any last things you want to say? I know you, as I said, have done some of the largest zero trust implementations on the planet for major corporations, and understanding the constructs that you went over today are critical. But is there any last comments you would like to leave people with? Because I know this can seem bewildering at first if we don't understand how to approach this and work through this.
So let's talk about resiliency for just a minute. Zero trust deals really well with confidentiality and integrity. So keeping something a secret that needs to be a secret, and then keeping a pristine data set from an integrity perspective. But it doesn't do that well in availability. So the model that we've talked about today does really well for availability. And the example that I often use is when somebody, say they get a fire in yellow, we talked about earlier the row houses, say yellow's on fire. Well, immediately you're going to have a SIM agent or some sort of an agent, FireEye, whatever, Tanium, Forescout, whatever tech you're using over there as far as your really robust logic. It's going to detect this. Even just open source SIMs can do this, but it's going to detect this. So one of the things that I do is I create a rule in my SIM to turn off all my firewall rules for the green zone. So immediately when something's first detected that really looks like a contagion, or there's a problem, a legitimate problem, the first thing my SIM does is fires this SSH over and turns off all of my rules going to green so that it's protected. And it does this at machine speed. So the resiliency factor in the face of that storm is extremely high. Sometimes people even go to the extent of they switch right over to a WMI to shut down their Windows servers, or they'll do a shutdown H in their Linux. And so that can be added to that rule as well in your SIM, because you're already, if you're killing the firewall rules, you're going to have a work stoppage issue. But now if something did actually get through, you're shutting it down to mitigate that damage. Some people do change of authentication on the switch ports or whatever to go to a different VLAN to isolate. That's fine on the yellow side, but I want to protect that green. And this model, having that choke point, does work well for that. And I guess that's the one thing we didn't cover that I wanted to mention.
Ernie, you're a wealth of information. You're a wonderful friend. We're here to help you succeed in your implementation plans. There'll be another phenomenal presentation next month on using threat intelligence and We're a resource to help you guys succeed. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Christy, so we can close out today.
Thank you for attending today. Please remember to access a short survey at the link we provided in chat. After the survey, you can request a certificate which you can use to request one continuous learning point for attending today. Follow your organizational guidance regarding requesting CLPs, and remember, CLPs for DAU events will not post automatically to your CL transcript and must be requested separately. A video of today's event will be available at the event page no later than Friday. Registration is now open for next month's Zero Trust Transforming Cybersecurity webinar. Visit the event page to register today. DAU is much more than what you see in the classroom. We offer consulting, coaching, customized solutions, and executive support. Visit Consulting Services for more information. And if you have ideas for future speakers, send us an email to events@dau.edu. DAU offers a variety of open enrollment workshops every month. Visit the virtual campus to see available workshops and other events. We also offer a variety of web events every month. Registration for these webinars is easy, just go to the events page and sign up today. That concludes today's event. Thank you for visiting DAU. Have a great day.